everybody! So, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today, and I'm going to go through our week 2 lesson just to add a few things to it. I know some of you already did it, but this is worth watching. So, the reason I decided not to continue with the genetics is because Mr. Bruce asked us to just do a little reviewing. And I kind of thought I would start by reviewing ecology just because you've got to be bored. And I thought maybe if you could at least get outside a little bit, make sure you're social distancing. But I thought just to have you looking at nature and to not get overwhelmed with all of the work. So, but some of the stuff in this is new, and I hope that everybody is good. So, welcome to my new classroom. It's my sheet on my porch. That's life right now, right? So, this is our second lesson, and this one I tried to include a couple labs. You do not have to do those if you can't. So, you don't need someone to go to the store and buy dried beans for you. You don't need to do that. If you have them at home, you can do it. It will even work with, you can even split a peanut. You don't have to soak it. You can split a peanut in half and you can see the embryo. It'll be all dried out because it's been roasted, but you can see it in there. So, so I wanted to really talk about the purpose of this plant. My Into the Woods with Me last week made me think about how important seeds are. And we were talking about ecosystems, and producers are the reason that all energy can start flowing. Right? Our producers are so important. Photosynthesis creates all the glucose. But we often forget that plants make seeds. Seeds come from flowers. And we need those to make new plants so we can continually have photosynthesis year after year. This amazing equation. We can't have this if plants don't reproduce. So I wanted to spend a little time this week learning about that. Plants have 4 main organs: the leaf, which is the site of photosynthesis, pretty amazing. They have a stem. Trees, we call the stem a trunk, just because it's classified that way because it's woody. And then annual plants have a stem. They don't get a woody trunk because they don't grow year after year. Right? They grow all summer, they die, they leave seeds behind, and they grow again. But the stem transports water, from the soil up to the leaves, so photosynthesis can happen. And it also moves sap. So xylem and phloem are 2 of the things, if you're interested in that. Just branches are just an extension of stems. And then roots bring the water in, so it can move up. And they also anchor the plant, super important. I'll probably do an Into the Woods about roots, because it's crazy, the root systems of some plants. Super, super cool. And then lastly, and what the most of this lesson is on, is the flower. The flower is the sex organ of the plant. Plants are sexual. They have egg and sperm. So flowers are pretty cool. If you get, aside from the petals, and if you have any flowers in your yard, if you pick one, you can take it apart and find the parts of the flower. So the female is normally in the center, the female part. It's the pistil, made of the stigma, which is sticky. I mean, not sticky like tape sticky, but it's like a wet sticky. And the style. And then the ovary is in the bottom of it. And then the male part of the plant is the stamen. The anther, the yellow, is where the pollen would be. And we want the stigma to be sticky because if a pollinator comes in like a bee to get to the nectar of this plant, the pollen gets stuck and it may transfer it to here, or wind or water can. It doesn't matter. There are multiple ways that the pollen can reach the stigma, and it's sticky, and so the pollen grain sticks here and then actually forms a pollen tube and goes down, and it fertilizes the egg. So normally this time of year, there's tons of things flowering, and you just don't know what those things are. And so the first really nice day that we have of the year, we'll go outside and we go on our flower walk. And it's a bummer that we can't do it together this year. And so I created sort of a virtual flower walk that I'll be posting. I went around and I collected unusual flowers. And at the end of these slides, there's a few pictures of unusual flowers that we don't normally think of. So this is on a birch tree. So these weird catkin flowers, they hang down. Everybody thinks of roses and tulips and daffodils, but there are so many different kinds of flowers. This is another very unusual type of flower. So, and I'll post some different pictures and things that I went out and found for you. But this one, these still have all of these parts, even though they don't look like this. So, going back to parts of the flower. So this is the reproductive organ of the plant. It creates a fruit, and the fruit holds the seeds. Seeds inside of them have the baby plant. Plants are sexual, which means they have an egg and a sperm. So they have an ovary that holds ovules. Those are the eggs. And then pollen is the sperm cell of the plant. So it can't move on its own. It needs a pollinator, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The female, like I said, is the pistil. The male is the stamen. And the anther is what produces the pollen. And pretty soon, pollen counts are kind of high right now, but they'll get really high when like all the pines and the oaks and all of that start to flower and produce pollen. Pines don't flower, they make cones, but to make those cones, they still make pollen. So, this was kind of cheesy, and I know it's a little immature if you watched this already, but it does walk through the structure of the flower. And then I included a couple time-lapse things of fruit forming for you. I think they're pretty interesting. And I love this chart because it shows how different fruits form from flowers. So we're really, around here, we're really used to seeing apples, and the seeds of the apple formed from these ovules that were deep within that flower, and then the fruit formed around it. And this video of the pear forming is great to kind of visualize how that happens. A pineapple is super cool and different. Each of these little pieces of the pineapple came from one flower. So this is actually called, this and raspberries are compound fruits. So they have multiple seeds. And they came from multiple flowers. So this would be a pineapple flower. And each of those makes one of those fruits. And then the raspberry is very seedy because it had a lot of different pistils, so it makes a lot of little seeds. And then just the pea, and this is where we get into the debate, what's the difference between a fruit and a vegetable, and we'll talk about that. But the main purpose of fruit is to hold a seed, and seeds are really important because that's where the embryo of the plant is. It's the immature plant. Fruit is amazing because if an animal eats it, it takes that seed into its body, and that seed passes through its digestive system, and it helps weaken the seed coat around it so that when the animal poops, perfect fertilizer, that seed has nutrients from the fertilizer, moisture, and it has been softened up by the digestive process so that it can germinate. Apple seeds, when we collect apple seeds to produce new apple trees, which most of those come from grafting and things now, but apple seeds they have to be soaked in acid to even get them to germinate, so to get the embryo to come out and grow. So the digestive process with seeds is super important. It's super cool to think about how in nature, right, that relationship between organisms that eat the seeds are helping process those seeds so that they can grow. Super neat stuff. Nature is so amazing, and I miss so much sharing it with you guys right now. I'm realizing that I'm almost starting to cry. It's so embarrassing. So, biologically speaking, vegetables are the vegetative parts of plants. They're the vegetative parts. So, asparagus is a vegetable because it's a stem. Broccoli is actually a flower. It hasn't bloomed yet. A beet is a root. So these are vegetables because they're the vegetative part. They're the part that grows and helps produce the flower, which makes the fruit, which will go in carrots and celery and spinach and cabbage and lettuce. Those are leaves. And then apples and green beans and green peppers and pumpkins and tomatoes, bananas and strawberries, those are fruits. So biologically speaking, they're a fruit because they hold a seed. And strawberries, the seeds are actually on the outside, kind of a funky little fruit. So this is a seed, let me back up a little bit, and it has a few main parts. So a seed coat, which is protective, and when I dissected it, you can see me, had some red beans in my cupboard. I didn't have a lot of dried beans, so I used red beans. They're kind of small, but they work. Pinto beans are the best for doing this. It's what I would have used at school. I have a bag of them at school. Inside, you find the cotyledon. This is made of starch. This is very important because before this embryo gets its stem above ground, which I have this video so you can show it growing, it's producing all these roots first, and it actually consumes the starch in this. And starch is glucose. So it consumes the stored starch. So this is really important to the development of the plant. And then you find this is the embryo, and the embryo has a radicle, which becomes the roots, a hypocotyl. This little spot is going to become the stem, but most important of all, the epicotyl becomes the leaf. And so you'll be able to watch this time lapse of a green bean growing, and you can see it growing, and it developed from that tiny little embryo that was inside that seed. That happened because that plant was pollinated. This is a cool picture of a bee with pollen grains all over it. So, if you have any questions, you can comment on it under the video link. And I will see you next week.